A leopard in Botswana makes her first solo kill. It's a baboon. She's got the carcass pinned when something moves in the fur. A baboon infant, only days old, crawls out from underneath its dead mother. By every rule of survival, this is just more food. Instead, she leaves the kill. She picks the infant up in her jaws, not the killing bite, a different bite, just enough pressure to hold and not enough to break skin. She carries it up into a tree, and for the rest of the day, this predator does something that shouldn't make evolutionary sense. She protects it. So here's the actual question. Did she know it was a baby, or did something in her brain just misfire? And here's the thing. This isn't a freak one-time glitch. Dogs have nursed kittens that weren't theirs. Cats have raised baby rabbits. Hens have sat on duck eggs, hatched them, and raised the ducklings as their own, completely unbothered that the babies swim and they can't. Different species, different mothers. Same result, over and over, which means whatever is happening in that leopard's head isn't unique to leopards. It's something bigger, something older. Here's what's actually going on. Back in the 1940s, an Austrian scientist named Konrad Lorenz noticed something odd. Baby animals across completely unrelated species tend to share the same basic face shape: big eyes positioned low on a big round head, a high bulging forehead, short limbs. He called it the baby schema, and his theory was that these proportions aren't just cute by accident, they're a signal, a universal one that evolution built to work across species lines, not just within them. For decades, that was mostly a theory. Then somebody actually put it in a brain scanner. A neuroscientist at Oxford named Morten Kringelbach wanted to know exactly how fast the brain reacts to a baby's face, and I mean exactly, not in seconds, in milliseconds. His team used a scanner called an MEG, which tracks brain activity in real time, fast enough to catch a reaction happening before a person's even aware they've seen anything. They flashed a mix of infant and adult faces at people and watched what lit up. The result, within about 130 milliseconds, roughly a seventh of a second, a very specific part of the brain fired differently for baby faces than adult ones. It's a region tied to reward, the same kind of area that lights up for things the brain considers worth pursuing. A seventh of a second. That's faster than you can consciously register you're even looking at a face. The brain isn't deciding to care. It's already decided before you show up to the conversation. And critically, nothing in this system checks a birth certificate. It doesn't require the face to be human. It just requires the proportions. Which brings us back to a leopard, alone in a tree, with a baby that isn't even her species. Her name was Legadema. She was filmed by wildlife documentarians Derek and Beverly Joubert in Botswana's Okavango Delta for a National Geographic documentary that ended up capturing something nobody expected to see. After she carried the baboon infant up into the tree, she didn't just sit there. Over the following hours, the infant kept losing its grip and falling. Every time, Legadema climbed down, picked it back up, and carried it to safety again, while hyenas were circling below, waiting. She groomed it. She let it nestle against her. At one point, the baby baboon tried to nurse, the way it would with its actual mother. Legadema had no milk to give it. She's a leopard. And this is where the story stops being a clean, feel-good clip. Because without nursing a baboon infant this young can't survive the night. By morning, it was gone. Legadema never ate it. She protected something she had no biological reason to protect, spent a night's worth of energy on it, kept predators away from it, and still couldn't save it because protection was never going to be enough. Nursing was. Here's what's strange, though. This wasn't an isolated glitch in one leopard's brain. Similar behavior, big cats retrieving and grooming infant prey animals instead of eating them, has been caught on camera more than once, in more than one place. Something about that infant's face and posture was loud enough to override millions of years of hunting instinct. Not permanently, not usefully in this case, but for one night it won. So far, this has all been about what a baby looks like, but looking isn't the only way this signal travels. It also comes through sound. In Alberta, Canada, two researchers, Susan Lingle from the University of Winnipeg and Tobias Reed from Midwestern University, ran a strange experiment out in open prairie. They hid speakers in the grass and played recordings of infant distress calls, not deer calls, recordings of human babies crying, fur seal pups, domestic cats, marmots, even bats. Then they watched what wild mule deer and white-tailed deer mothers actually did. Every one of those species, none of them anything a wild Canadian deer would ever naturally encounter, and still, deer mothers moved toward the speaker, not occasionally, consistently. Here's the part that made it real science and not just a cute anecdote. The researchers found the deciding factor wasn't the species making the sound, it was the pitch, the frequency of the cry. Fall inside a certain range and the deer respond no matter whose baby is actually making the noise. Mule deer in particular weren't picky at all. White-tailed deer were a little more selective, but even they'd move for a call from a completely unrelated species, as long as the frequency was close enough. The mammal brain, in other words, isn't running a check for, is this my species? It's running a much cruder, much older check. Does this sound like something helpless in trouble? Recognize the signal. Respond to the signal. That's it. That's the whole test. But here's where the story stops being simple. Recognizing that something is a baby and being moved to protect it, those are two separate systems. Most of the time they run together. They don't always. Hanuman langurs, a species of monkey found across India, live in troops usually run by one dominant male. That male doesn't hold power forever. Eventually a rival shows up, fights him off, and takes over. A researcher named Sarah Blaffer, Hurdy, spent years watching one of these troops in the 1970s at a site called Mount Abu. And she documented something disturbing. After a new male took over, infants in the troop kept disappearing. Dozens of them, over the course of her fieldwork, right around the timing of each takeover. This isn't the new male failing to notice the infants aren't his, it's closer to the opposite. He clearly can recognize them because he's targeting them specifically, not the older juveniles, not the adults. The reason comes down to biology most people don't think about. A nursing female doesn't go back into fertility until she stops nursing. As long as another male's infant is alive and feeding, that female is off the table, reproductively speaking. Remove the infant and she cycles back into fertility, sooner and now available to him. It's a brutal piece of math, and it's not unique to langurs. When a new male takes over a lion pride, he'll typically kill the cubs sired by the male he replaced. Male bottlenose dolphins have been documented attacking and killing newborn calves that aren't theirs. The same basic pattern shows up in bears, same detection system running underneath all of it. In a leopard, it triggered protection. Here, in an entirely different context, it triggers the opposite. The recognition never fails. What happens after it is what changes. So it would be easy to end there, on the dark version. But that's not the whole picture either. In the Thai forest in Ivory Coast, a research team led by primatologist Christophe Bosch spent decades tracking a community of wild chimpanzees. And across that time, they documented 18 separate cases of chimps adopting orphaned youngsters that weren't related to them at all. Here's the detail that stands out. Half of those adoptions were done by males, and when the researchers checked the genetics, only one of those adopting males turned out to actually be the orphan's father. The rest had absolutely nothing to gain biologically. Some of these adoptive relationships lasted for years. The adult would wait for the orphan during travel, step in to protect it during conflicts, share food with it. That's not a passive tolerance. That's active, sustained, costly care. for a baby that shares none of the adopter's genes and can't repay any of it. And it's not just chimps. It's the same pattern you'll find in a lot of ordinary places. The dog that nurses a kitten, the hen that raises ducklings, the barn cat that adopts an orphaned rabbit. None of these animals are confused about what species they are. They're just responding to a signal that was never built to check IDs in the first place. Which brings us to the one species that didn't just benefit from this system by accident. It learned to exploit it on purpose. The common cuckoo doesn't raise its own young. A female cuckoo sneaks a single egg into another bird's nest, a reed warbler usually, and leaves. When it hatches, the cuckoo chick's first move is to push every one of the host's real eggs and chicks out of the nest. So now there's exactly one baby in that nest, and it looks nothing like a reed warbler chick. It's not even close. Here's the problem for the cuckoo. Being alone in the nest should be a disadvantage. Part of how host parents judge how much food to bring is how many open begging mouths they see. One mouth should mean less food. Researchers at Cambridge, Rebecca Kilner, David Noble, and Nick Davies, figured out how the cuckoo gets around this. It can't fake having 4 hungry chicks visually. It's just one bird. So instead, it compensates with sound, an exaggerated, rapid begging call tuned specifically to whatever makes host parents feed harder and faster. It's not mimicking the sound of a full nest, technically. It's exploiting the fact that the parents' brains respond to the intensity of a begging call more than they check whether the visual matches. Find the setting that maxes out the parent's feeding response, and the visual mismatch stops mattering. And it works. A single cuckoo chick ends up eating as much as an entire brood of the host species would have. It grows 3 or 4 times the size of the parents feeding it. Birds that at this point are working themselves ragged for a baby that clearly isn't theirs, that looks nothing like their own species and that already killed their real children to get this position. They keep feeding it anyway. Every mechanism we've talked about this entire video, the fast, preconscious brain response, the universal pull of a distress call, the system that doesn't check species, the cuckoo didn't break any of it. It just found the exact setting where that system stops asking questions. So, back to the actual question. Do animals know when something is a baby? Yes. Across every case here, the recognition itself never failed. Leopards, deer, langurs, chimps, host birds, all of them accurately, reliably detected this is an infant. The part that was never guaranteed was what came after that recognition. In Legadema, it triggered protection even at a cost, even without a payoff. In the langur troop, the same recognition triggered exactly the opposite. In a reed warbler's nest, it got hijacked entirely by something that was never supposed to be there. We tend to tell ourselves that compassion, noticing something small and defenseless and choosing to protect it, is one of the things that makes humans different, special. But a leopard spent a night in a tree protecting a baby from a species she hunts for nothing. A troop of unrelated chimpanzees spent years raising an orphan that would never share their genes. A pair of researchers hiding speakers in a field found that wild deer would run toward the sound of a human baby crying without ever having heard one before. The detection was never the impressive part. Almost every mammal alive has some version of it, wired in before birth. What's actually rare, what's actually worth paying attention to, is what an animal chooses to do once it knows. One more thing before you go. There's a small paw print hidden somewhere in this video. Not this frame, somewhere earlier. If you spot it, drop the timestamp in the comments. I'll pick one person at random and shout them out in the next video. Thanks for watching.